Dave Sloan es director mundial de tecnología de Microsoft para el sector público. Su trabajo se centra en el desarrollo del mercado global y su labor consiste en negociar la intersección entre legislación, regulación, política, ingeniería, tecnología e innovación con países y gobiernos de todo el mundo. Tiene 30 años de experiencia y sus áreas particulares de enfoque se centran en adaptar la adopción de la nube para cumplir con las prioridades nacionales, arquitecturas de nube flexibles, medidas avanzadas de protección de datos e innovación híbrida, e implementación del uso de las inteligencias artificiales en el sector público. Hoy en exclusiva para Congreso y Sociedad en su visita a Colombia, nos habla sobre el uso de inteligencias artificiales en el Estado, alojamiento en la nube, Internet de las cosas, metaverso y diferentes herramientas para hacer del sector público uno más eficiente.
Amables televidentes, bienvenidos a Congreso y Sociedad, programa institucional de la Secretaría General del Senado de la República. Hoy nos acompaña Dave Sloan. Dave, bienvenido a Congreso y Sociedad.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Dave, ¿qué necesitan entender los políticos de la inteligencia artificial?
I think understanding about artificial intelligence is becoming what I would call a fundamental competence for policymakers. The same way that we would never expect one of our political leaders to be successful today if they didn't understand mobile technology, or they didn't understand the internet, or they didn't understand how to use a personal computer, or what the impact of that would be on their office or their society. I think fundamental understanding about artificial intelligence is becoming one of those bootstrap skills that is necessary for all leaders to have. Now, that doesn't mean they need to be data scientists. It doesn't mean that they need to be able to create their own models or anything like that. But it does mean that they will need to understand the capacity of AI and the capacity it has to digitally transform society. I think there are two key ways that we need to understand the transformational capability of AI in the public sector. One internal, one external. From an internal perspective, we know that our public sector workforce is under tremendous pressure. We're in an era of growing problems that government is expected to confront, and limited budgets and difficulty recruiting and retaining staff into the public sector workforce. So fundamentally, the public sector workforce needs to do more with less. And unleashing the ability of artificial intelligence to reduce the number of mundane tasks that they need to accomplish and allow them to focus on the mission that their particular talents enable them to confront, that is a transformative capability. Put simply, you can give hours of a week back to every individual in government when you equip them with these skills. On the external side, this has a dramatic transformational effect on citizen services. Citizen services right now are often mired in bureaucracy. They become extraordinarily difficult for regular citizens to access, even things that the government has established for their benefit and on their behalf. So creating much more natural interfaces, the ability of AI to make it accessible and inclusive to a broader segment of the population, is sort of an entry-level external transformation for public sector services. But then we have fundamental design changes that can happen, transformed services that it's very difficult to conceive of now, where the artificial intelligence can actually imbue the services that the citizens receive with more intelligence. So it is reaching out to citizens who need these services before they even realize that those services are available, or tailoring those services to the citizens based on the circumstances and their needs without even their knowledge. So that's sort of the art of the possible in terms of what transformed external citizen services using AI is going to bring us, not in a decade, but in the next year or two.
¿Qué ejemplos existen puntuales del uso de la inteligencia artificial en el gobierno y en el sector público, tanto en países desarrollados como en países subdesarrollados?
So, artificial intelligence broadly has been in use by government for years, including here in Colombia, where there are exciting projects that are using artificial intelligence to do analysis of both satellite and audio data from the Amazon in order to track deforestation in ways that previously could never have been done manually. But I think the most exciting use cases are the ones that are now leveraging generative AI, the most recent revolution in artificial intelligence, on behalf of the public sector. So let me cite just a couple examples there. And indeed, these come from all swaths of country, not limited to high income or high capacity countries, because after all, the models have already been trained. That has a tremendous democratizing effect where any country is able to play on an even playing field with any other country when it comes to these models. But here's some specific examples. Nearby in Mexico, the Supreme Court of Mexico has placed almost 100,000 judicial decisions and about 300,000 judicial opinions online through generative AI. Now, these are written in legal language that, let's be honest, is only accessible to a few lawyers, not to the entire population.
To old people.
But there's critical information about society that is captured in those. So by putting them into a generative AI model, it allows citizens to ask questions in natural language, not legal language, but the type of language that any citizen could phrase in Spanish to be able to ask about what's going on in these Supreme Court decisions and receive answers back, not as a long list of links to obscure documents that they can't understand, but having merged the intelligence from that document and giving it back in natural language as well. Just in the first 2 months that this was available in Mexico, it fielded over 600,000 inquiries from citizens. So there was clearly tremendous interest and tremendous demand in this more accessible, inclusive style of government. Going a little bit farther afield, the Ministry of Justice in Portugal put their family law regulations online. These are things that deal with events that occur in anyone's life. Birth, adoption, marriage, divorce, any of these things are, can be very stressful events, and there are certain procedures that you need to follow. The last thing you want to do is engage with bureaucracy at that point, but by putting a generative interface on it, natural language in Portuguese was sufficient to get citizens all the information they need. It's been released to tremendous acclaim, and they're going to expand it to different areas of law over which the Ministry of Justice has domain. To your point of places without tremendous resources, we have 2 examples in Canada which are really interesting. One in a city outside of Quebec, one with relatively good resources, and one in the tiny city of Kelowna out in British Columbia. Both used a generative AI interface to try to field citizen requests. These are citizen requests that could be about anything from school registration to accessing healthcare clinics, or even simple things like road repair or trash collection. It turns out that the generative AI was able to handle many of these requests by itself without the intervention of any human. But even the ones that had human intervention had a script already developed for the human that had most of the relevant information ready for them, where they didn't have to search for it internally in their systems. Now, this was nice in Quebec, where it sort of reduced backlog and made the process for getting citizen responses much easier. But in Kelowna, where they really only have a few people doing city maintenance, the choice was whether these folks were going to be doing the maintenance or answering calls about the maintenance. So when they found out that 80% of their maintenance requests could be discovered from the citizens, analyzed and routed automatically, that put their limited staff back out into the streets, where they were able to actually execute their public sector mission on behalf of citizens. So a very tiny example, but one when you scale it up to large municipalities, provinces, or even countries, can have dramatic effects. I'll cite one more example just because I think it changes our mindset away from just this, ChatGPT type interface, and shows the real intelligence of the tool being used in another way. And this was in Taiwan, where the Ministry of Education invested in a tool called Cool English. They call it the Cool eBot. They give this to students, and the students in English start to tell a story together with the computer. So the bot will prompt them and say, where did the story take place? Who are some of the characters? What did they do next? These sorts of questions that help the students build a story. There's nothing really revolutionary about that. That's a very classic pedagogical technique. But what's actually happening in the background is that the generative AI engine is sensing those areas where the student is doing really well and will ask it questions that challenge the student a little further on those skills, and also recognizes areas, let's say on grammar, where the student is below grade level, and then is able to ask questions that remediate that skill and give them extra practice and extra strength in that regard. This isn't replacing a teacher, by the way. The teacher is being fed all of this data in real time about where their students actually are in their English skills so that they can create a lesson plan and curriculum that is tailored to exactly what their classroom needs at that moment. That is giving our teachers superpowers. There's no public sector in the world that could afford an individualized English tutor for every one of those students, but here they're getting that same level of service through the transformative power of generative AI.
Don't compete with the teachers that complement the teachers.
Yeah, what we call a co-pilot. The teacher's still the pilot, but this is a co-pilot, augmenting their skills, making them more efficient and more effective at their jobs.
Muy interesantes reflexiones con Dave Sloan. Vamos a algunos mensajes institucionales y ya regresamos con Congreso y Sociedad. De nuevo en Congreso y Sociedad con Dave Sloan. Dave, ¿por qué Microsoft le apuesta y lleva desarrollando tanto tiempo el uso de la inteligencia artificial para el sector público y también para la vida cotidiana?
It's really in keeping with Microsoft's mission, which is to empower individuals and organizations all over the world to achieve more. And we haven't seen this sort of dramatic, transformative capability for public sector to be able to achieve more in a very long time. I think that even within a few years, we're going to see public sector services and public sector workforces that are working very differently than we conceive of them today.
Doctor Dave, en el sector público hay temor porque la inteligencia artificial pueda sustituir el empleo y reemplazar a los trabajadores. ¿Es este un temor bien infundado o por el contrario la inteligencia artificial puede multiplicar los trabajos?
Look, calculators have been around for a long time. We still have accountants. From my perspective, AI is not a replacement for individuals. We still need the human judgment and skill that comes with all professional roles. What AI helps us to do is not be distracted by mundane tasks that can be taken care of for us in an automated fashion and focus more on the special content of our positions, of our employment. So while I do believe that there will be some realignment of positions due to AI, and I think that's reasonable to expect, for the vast majority of roles, I expect this to augment human activity rather than replace it.
Doctor Dave, ¿cuál es la posición de Colombia en el uso y la implementación de la inteligencia artificial?
So one of the magnificent things about generative AI is that it is hosted on the hyperscale cloud exclusively. What that means for Colombia and any nation is that accessibility is uniform. It's truly a democratized technology around the globe. For previous generations of technology, sometimes you needed to invest the equivalent of tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars into physical plant data centers before you could play on that field. That's no longer the case in the cloud. Anyone can sign up for an account and be ready to use these tools instantaneously. Many of them are available to begin with for free or at extraordinarily low cost, and the significant costs don't kick in until you're already working at scale of, potentially millions of interactions or things like that. So Colombia is in an excellent place to begin experimenting and innovating with artificial intelligence today.
Hemos hablado de los beneficios de la inteligencia artificial, pero toda tecnología trae riesgos y trae beneficios. ¿Cuáles son los riesgos que trae la inteligencia artificial para la humanidad?
Yeah, so I think that generative AI does have significant risks that come with such a powerful tool. And it is the appropriate goal of government to be concerned about those risks. Certainly, many of those risks can be mitigated by ensuring that for any high impact use cases, things that affect people's lives, their health, their employment, that there's always a human in the loop, that the AI is advising a human as opposed to making any autonomous decisions. But there are other areas too that can be affected by this. For example, misinformation and disinformation. There's very realistic things that are being built up with generative AI. So I think a degree of transparency, even if that is enforced by the government, is very relevant here to ensure that generative content is labeled as generated content so that we're able to very quickly and easily distinguish between the provenance of something that occurred in real life and something that was created by AI.
Doctor Dave, ¿cuáles son los beneficios concretos para los gobiernos de alojar información pública en servidores de empresas privadas?
How much time do you have? I can make this a very long answer, but I'll try and condense it. I work with governments around the world on their cloud adoption, and there are so many different value propositions that they take advantage of. But I'm going to narrow it down to just three and address them very briefly. The first is agility. Governments have worked for a very long time to try to encourage a risk-taking culture, one that can build upon failure in order to achieve greater successes. But in classical legacy architectures, the cost of that failure was so high that unfortunately that sort of culture never emerged. With the cloud, because you can experiment at very low cost, we reduce the cost of failure to near zero, and an entrepreneurial, experimental, innovative culture in government emerges. That's one major reason. Second major reason is the threat environment, specifically around public sector computing, has never been worse, and it's getting even worse than it is now. Cyber threats, both from organized criminal groups as well as nation-state attackers, are increasing exponentially. And increasingly, the difficulty of providing cybersecurity for a legacy on-prem data center is becoming untenable. It's a losing battle. The hyperscale cloud is the gold standard in cybersecurity. So public sector workloads are running, not walking, to get that protection in the cloud that they need for sensitive citizen data. And the third one is innovation. It's no longer just that new innovative apps and algorithms are coming first to the cloud. Increasingly, they're coming exclusively to the cloud. And we want our public sector workforce to have access to the most innovative tools and platforms that exist anywhere in the world so that they can confront the most challenging problems that society presents them. So they need to have access to the cloud. This comes with certain assurances that need to be made about the privacy of data. And at least at Microsoft, we believe that your data is your data. It's none of our business. We don't seek to access it, to analyze it, to monetize it, or exploit it in any way. So we have both the philosophy as well as the contractual guarantees to allow government to compute securely on the cloud with confidence that their citizens' data privacy is being respected.
Este verano de la inteligencia artificial se ha robado toda la atención, está en todos los periódicos y la gente está concentrada pensando en esa tecnología. Pero hay otras tecnologías emergentes que se están desarrollando. ¿Cuáles son esas otras tecnologías que van a transformar este planeta?
Yeah, I think that we're going to see expressions of innovation in everyday life, right? We see the advances in AI being matched by advances in the Internet of Things, where we have, sensors that are more sensitive and more capable of gathering data from the environment, from individuals, persons. I think customized medicine, right, personalized pharmaceuticals and advances in neuroscience that are being able to be made as data can be analyzed at scale are also very promising. And of course, the metaverse is not that far behind. We have virtual reality and augmented reality form factors that can make our world look very different in years to come.
Doctor Dave, en algunos sectores de América Latina se omite el uso de la tecnología porque el acceso análogo a los recursos permite que sea más fácil manipularlos y por ende genera como más opciones para que se den desafortunados casos de corrupción. ¿Cómo puede hacer el Estado, cómo pueden hacer los gobiernos para que definitivamente haya políticas de Estado que adopten el uso de la tecnología y que se evite la corrupción precisamente?
Yeah, to me, digital transformation and anti-corruption are completely linked resources. I remember seeing, not in Colombia, but in other countries, long lines of citizens who had traveled far distances at tremendous personal expense in order to do a simple bureaucratic task, to enroll their child in school or apply for a public benefit, to even get a license to start a business, to make it up to the window at the end of a long line only to be told that, sorry, the office was closed, but we could stay open a little longer if our overtime was compensated, right? These small delays that create opportunities for corruption. When we blow that process up and make government accessible, traceable, transparent, available 24/7, anywhere in the country, the opportunities for corruption are bled out of the system. Right? Sunlight is the greatest disinfectant, and there is no more transparent environment than these well-audited, well-tracked digital processes. So for me, digital transformation and anti-corruption go hand in hand.
Doctor Dave, ¿cuál es el motivo principal de su visita a nuestro país?
So Colombia is on the map from Microsoft's perspective. I'm very excited about what the potential for public sector transformation here, both using the hyperscale cloud and using our latest artificial intelligence techniques, are here in Colombia. And it's really been a pleasure and a privilege to be able to meet with customers who are right on the cusp of that innovation, pushing progress forward for the benefit of the Colombian public sector and the Colombian society at large.
Bueno, Dave, muchas gracias por tu visita aquí a Congreso y Sociedad. Desafortunadamente se nos acabó el tiempo. Tendríamos un montón más de preguntas por hacerte. Esperamos tenerte en una próxima oportunidad aquí. And thanks for your visit.
It's been my pleasure. Muchas gracias.
Y a ustedes, amables televidentes, los invitamos a contactarnos a través de nuestras redes sociales. Los esperamos aquí en Congreso y Sociedad en una próxima oportunidad.